Good morning, or I should say good night. It is Monday morning here at 10:41, March 16th. Hope everyone's doing good. Really great weekend. This weekend was really fun. So it was movies, bunch of recording, Chinese food, hanging out with the family. My dad turned 90, or is turning 90 years old this week, which is just a trip. But we went out for dinner yesterday, and we'll get together on Sunday. Actually, his birthday is this coming Friday, so we're gonna do a dinner at the folks' house. I'll get some movies, the usual, and then this week is also St. Patty's Day, Tuesday, so I'll go over there for dinner for that and get some more movies. So we'll be watching quite a few movies this week, which is always great for me. So yesterday we went for Chinese food for part of his birthday festivities. The kickoff to his celebration of being 90 years old, which is a trip. So we went to this really great Chinese buffet restaurant yesterday in Bangor, which is like an hour away. But the other thing that was really awesome is I went to Bull Moose Music and I got a bunch of great movies. I watched two of them last night. Super excited to be talking about them. Got a couple other movies. I got an album that I really wanted. So it was great. I hadn't actually been to Bull Moose in quite a while, so it was awesome. I went with my folks. It was funny because they were kind of not excited about going to Bull Moose at first. We've we've done that a lot over the years. We'll go out for Chinese food or go up to Bangor together, like just as a little family outing. And typically in the past, when we would go to Chinese food, it's been a few years since we've done that, but we would always go to Bull Moose first and then go to out to dinner to a buffet. But yesterday they weren't really feeling it, and then I said, "Well, see how it goes. See how you're feeling when we get there." And then they were like, "Okay, we'll go there." And then within 5 minutes, they were like hooked and just they were actually shopping and into it more than I was. I picked out. They had yesterday was a top notch trip to Bull Moose. I really love the Bull Moose in Bangor. They had such an amazing amount of movies. Like within the first 5 minutes that I was there, I saw a bunch of titles that I was like, hell yeah! And I could have stayed there for 3 hours. I mean, there was still a lot of movies that if I was a rich man, I would have bought like probably $1,000 worth of shit right there. I mean, it was just great. It's been a while. It's been a while since I bought any new movies. I'm kind of making that transition. I think as a collector of movies, I think I'm like again. I love big budget Hollywood films. I don't really discriminate. I don't really care if a movie has $1 billion behind it or is shot for $35. Like a movie should be a fun and kind of thrilling experience, regardless of the budget or whatever. I don't really discriminate towards that. But and obviously when I go to the movies, it's typically newer films. But today's exception, and one of the last two times, ironically, after saying that, ironically, the last two movies I've saw in the theater were two Friday 13th movies, which is today's show, which I'm going to be talking about. But for the most part, it's all newer films, and I own, even though I really got into Blu-ray about probably 6, 7 years. No, well, I'd say maybe a little less than that, maybe 5, 6 years ago. I got into Blu-ray pretty big, and I started buying Blu-ray. And most of the time now, when I buy movies, it's all Blu-ray. I'm not sure if I'm ever going to make the leap to 4K, but we'll see. And up until fairly recently, even Christmas, I bought, I still on occasion buy DVDs. I would typically go, and I haven't been down there in a while, but like going down to the Goodwill in Rockland, which is really great. I buy a lot of movies there, and sometimes I'm like on the fence where, like yesterday, I was like, you know what? I think I'm just gonna stick to buying exploitation movies just on Blu-ray. That's it. Because, but I probably won't. But I sometimes go back and forth, just because of spacing. Running out of space and my kind of getting maxed out a lot of the times by the amount of movies I end up buying. Even though I haven't been buying as many, but I still buy them. It's been probably I got a handful of movies around December, January. I got some new films that were really great. About 4 or 5 new exploitation movies, and probably one or two DVDs. I got some DVDs or Blu-rays from Santa Claus around Christmas time. But it's been a while. It's been a hot minute since I bought any movies. It's been a good solid, at least close to 3 months. So it's been a while, which is kind of ridiculous. So it was really great to go up there. But I sometimes do that where I'm like, I'm just gonna just buy Blu-ray. I'm just gonna buy exploitation movies. My genre that I always constantly watch at home. But I probably won't. I mean, who knows? But that's just kind of how I go back and forth, and it's usually because I want to like build up that side of my collection even more. Even though I mostly buy or still, even when I was buying movies fairly regularly, I still have more, quite a few more. I still have more DVDs than Blu-rays, just because, I mean, when I started buying DVDs, it was like shit, probably like in the late 90s, like 97, 98. The late 90s was when I'd always had a few movies growing up with my family. Like my parents always had movies in their collection. They always had VHS, and then they eventually got DVDs. Now they just have DVDs. They pretty much got rid of all of their VHS, but they have a pretty big movie collection. So, you know, decades really when you think of it as far as how long I've been buying DVDs. But Blu-rays is like my first kind of choice if I have a choice. Like that's definitely where I'll go. If I see a really good deal on a movie that's really cheap, and it's maybe a movie I haven't seen in a long time, or a movie maybe it's a movie I really want to revisit, I'll probably buy it on DVD. But generally I don't. I don't go out of my way. But it was a great weekend. Otherwise, I had a big recording session on Saturday. This woman that I met a few years ago, Jane Kirksling. She is a really talented singer songwriter. Her and her husband Matt are both filmmakers. So they also do like these comedy skits. They both have YouTube channels. Really super creative people. And her husband Matt just finished a horror film, which is super insane and totally bonkers. I might be doing a big interview segment with him and do a review of the film. Like he sent me a screener. Really cool movie. Totally bonkers. Kind of a modern day exploitation movie, really. And his film is also going to be premiering at this underground kind of music film festival. So I might be doing an interview with him and the filmmakers, but we'll see how that all goes and how we haven't set up anything yet, but we'll see. So I've been working with Jane for a while, and she's been writing this really cool, interesting music that is kind of like country inspired. The music has a big influence from David Lynch, and then also a lot of spaghetti westerns. So it's really interesting music. So we ended up starting. Well, we originally were going to start it sooner, but then the dates had to get pushed up by 2 or 3 weeks. So the first date that I had to do the recording was this past Saturday. So I went there Saturday and managed to get all the tracks done that I needed to get done. It was about an 8 hour day in the studio, 7 to 8 hours, and I was pretty tired at the end of it, but it was great. It was super fun. Had some breaks, in between. We didn't just go go go. but it was great, and we got got going, got some good momentum. And if I have to, if I get called back to do some more, if she decides she needs more retakes or overdubs, or I'll obviously do that. But I wanted to try to go in and try to knock out everything. I try to do that with studio stuff, with studio projects. I try to be, I don't know, in my past, the last few years, and especially like years ago when I started recording projects, like whether it was my recording projects, music that I was writing, or music that I was, playing on someone else's project. I used to, I don't know, not go to the session. Probably, I've always felt like I was never prepared enough, and I was always like, because of that, I was always nervous a lot of the times in the sessions, and I was never like felt like I was relaxed or comfortable. And also at that time when I was recording, there was a time way back when I was doing a lot of session work for a lot of different bands. When I had gotten out of school, when I went to Berkeley and I had gotten out of Berkeley, I got a got into a pretty cool situation, and I had had no experience doing it before, but I had a friend who had another friend who had a recording studio. People I eventually met, they had this working studio. They had a series of all of these different bands that were coming through town, mostly rock bands, and they were doing all of these like recordings. And they were a pretty busy studio, and a lot of the bands were, coming friends of friends, but then most of the bands were like out of town. And Buddy Revell, I believe, was the guy. One of the guys' names. It was Glenn Dubois and Buddy Revell. Buddy Revell was, when he was younger, and this was quite a few years ago. But when he was younger, he also, it was tough because he had battled. He was an alcoholic towards the kind of the later of his life, and it ultimately did him in. But when I met him, he was still like in pretty good shape. But when he was young, he was kind of a pretty serious producer. Like he worked on so many major records. He worked with like Eric Clapton, Cream, a bunch of records in the '70s. Worked with Bob Dylan. He worked with all these amazing people and produced a lot of artists when he was young. And he had a problem with alcoholism and addiction, and then his career kind of, I think his career suffered because of it. And then he got back. He got into a better place and started getting back into recording. And I guess he moved to Maine, became and was friends with Glenn Dubois, who's an amazing local musician. And then they started this studio, and it was called the E Space. And I knew Glenn a little bit, and then he had invited me just kind of on a whim to like maybe do some tracking for this rock band that was in town that was going to record at their studio. And I went there, and I had no experience in the studio, or didn't know anything really about it. And I went to the studio and ended up recording a couple of the tracks, and then I ended up getting paid to do it, and I was like, wow. And I was like really young. I was like, I don't know, 21, 22, maybe even just 20 years old. And I was like, oh, what? You get paid for this? Like, I was, I was, I was like, wow, okay, this is kind of cool. But I didn't know anything. I didn't know what I was doing. I don't, not that I do now, but then after that session, he started inviting me back for more and more sessions. So I started going there for, I don't know, it was quite a while, maybe 6 months to a year, maybe a little bit more. And I started doing all these recording sessions for different bands that were coming through in town, mostly all like rock bands and even like metal bands, like more like in the style of like hair metal bands, like kind of cock rock stuff. But I was getting paid to do it, and I just threw myself into it because I wanted to learn about the craft of recording. I didn't know anything about it. It was very foreign to me, and I just ended up doing it, and ended up being a really great experience. It was hard, and I was never really comfortable doing it, but I really loved it. And then fast forward years later, I started doing some more recording sessions for different people, whatever, demo stuff or just self-produced records or whatever. And again, I liked it, and I felt a little bit better at it, and feeling a little bit more comfortable. But I never felt like I was prepared, and I always felt like when I would go into the studio, I would waste, I'd end up wasting people's time because I wasn't ready. And then the last few years, I really tried to focus on trying to be as prepared. Like if I have a recording project coming up, trying to prepare myself as much as I can before the session, and trying to be more efficient and try to save, because obviously with recording projects, bands that I've been pulled into to do a session with, there's a budget sometimes, and then there's like you're kind of limited on time a little bit. So I tried to, about 6, 7 years ago, I tried to prepare myself more. Like if I knew a studio session was coming up to record with a band, I would do as much as I could on my own and try to maximize the time. So, and then after trying to do that and changing how I would go into the studio, and I'd usually like, go in and just knock out the tunes, and then that would be it. And wouldn't be dicking around for hours and then having to come back, to redo all these tracks. Just trying to be more efficient. So since then, I've been really trying to focus on just going in as prepared as I can. And I now too, the other thing that's really shifted for me over the years is, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I didn't really like recording very much. I just found it really hard and intimidating. I just didn't enjoy it. Now I love recording. I almost love it as much as like playing gigs. So I really love recording. And I think a lot of that had to do with getting the experience of doing a lot of recording on my own over the years. And I've been doing a lot of, I got, over the last 10 years or so, I've acquired a lot of experience like recording my own music, mostly with Quantum, and found myself really enjoying it and learning about the process and giving myself more time to prepare, and then trying to have more patience around it. So now when I go in, I just try to do the job as as best as I can, and then call it a day. I try not to fuck around, waste people's time, and dilly dally and all that stuff. That's so usually now, I do a recording session. It doesn't take as long. I enjoy it a lot more, and then if things come up where I really need to change a part last minute, I try to be just even more flexible and open to that. So anyway, so we had a big session on Saturday, and we ended up finishing all the tracks. So, and again, if they call back and ask me to do more, maybe I got to redo a couple of tracks, or maybe they want to do some overdubs. Of course, I'll do it. But that's kind of how I try to do it. Try to go in and just knock it all out, and not fuck around too much and all that kind of shit. So, and then on Friday, which is the main reason behind this video, I went to Black Bear Cinema again to see Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Amazing. I went with a couple of friends last week. Or, no, I shouldn't say last week. It was probably, well, at this point, I'd say it was probably a month ago. Black Bear Cinema in Orono is a fantastic theater. Really, really fantastic theater. It's a school. It's a theater owned by Orono, the college up there in Orono, Maine, and it's really a beautiful theater. And there's 8 theaters inside. It has this kind of old school vibe to it. Like it kind of gives me, when I go to Black Bear Cinema in Orono, it gives me like this heavy vibe of nostalgia from like when I remember going to the movies a lot with my family as a kid. It's just kind of got that vibe because it has this old school thing, but yet, the seating is a little bit more modern. The sound system is really, really great, but it has this kind of old school vibe, which is really cool. And there's 8 theaters in there, and I went about a month ago to see Friday 13th Part 3 in 3D. Completely amazing experience. And then going there, realized that this was part, after talking to the manager, the people that run the theater are super cool. They're all really, really nice. This past week, when we went, we ended up talking and hanging out even more, which was really, really cool. So we went to the theater and it was killer. But we found out afterwards that this was part of a series that Black Bear was starting, where they were going to show every Friday 13th movie in the franchise on the actual date of Friday 13th. And I'm like, yep, sold right here. Perfection. The funny thing is, so this past Friday was a Friday 13th. But the funny thing is, the next movie and the next date, or it won't, the next Friday 13th on our calendar, and the next movie that they're going to be showing won't be until November 13th. So there'll be a little bit of a gap in between. But I think that's the coolest idea. I thought it was a little bit surprising or weird that they started the series with part 3. So I'm not sure why, but anyway, I think that's a strength. I've talked about that before with the Friday 13th movies. Like, yeah, they're slasher exploitation movies, super fun, super campy, great kills, everything you want. But I do think, as far as individual movies in the franchise, I do feel that there is. I do think that they are kind of like standalone films. You can watch. I really think you can throw in any movie in the franchise and have a good time. You don't need to know or have to have seen every movie before or what have you. You can go into it totally cold, because I do think each movie, again, they're campy and silly and fun, but they give, for each film, they always give enough of, without it being like a full on kind of recap, but they do give you enough backstory to some degree, or in some capacity in each movie, so there is a little bit of a reference point of, oh, okay, this is what sort of happened before we got here. There's always that. And I do think, I do think that as a film franchise, and just as just the movies themselves individually, especially, I do think that I feel like Friday 13th, the franchise, doesn't get credit for actually being pretty creative and making movies that I feel are, standalone movies. I feel like each movie honestly stands on its own feet. And I think creatively, the franchise, especially some of the later films, really, took some chances, really, like really pushed the envelope a little bit. And I think, again, they're the most, for my money, it's the most consistent franchise in general, just movies in general. But when it comes to the slasher genre, just fantastic, super fun. And it's funny because I've been doing so many videos lately on Friday 13th. I started this new series of where I've been doing videos on, trying to do a video where I'm talking about each actor slash stuntman who has played Jason Voorhees, and that's been a lot of fun. It's kind of a newer series. I've been doing that, and I had mentioned in one of the videos I should just change my channel to Friday 13th Film Fanatic, because every video as of the last 2 or 3 weeks has been something on Friday 13th. So, but anyway, there's always other movies I'm going to be talking about. Obviously, there's still tons of shit that I want to get to. I just like uploaded a new review on a new film, Undertone, which I ended up seeing on Friday night. But Friday night was awesome. So I went up. It was almost the same kind of situation as Friday 13th Part 3 when I went up. I wasn't sure if, I had asked a bunch of friends or a few friends about going. Hadn't really heard from anybody. And then late Thursday night, finally kind of got a confirmation from a friend that was like, "Yep, we're gonna go." So I was like, "Sweet." And I was at a point where I'm gonna go. I gotta go to see this movie either way. You know, Friday 13th, the franchise means so much to me as far as like just my formal years in regards to like discovering the horror genre, falling totally madly in love with the horror genre, and then just becoming a massive fan of film, which I've become an obsessed fan with all things movies. Friday 13th was really the thing that did it for me, really. So I have a deep kind of connection to this franchise. And again, it's a funny thing because they're silly, goofy, campy slasher movies, exploitation movies. And I totally understand that, totally get that. And that's what I love about them because they're fun. But on a deeper level, I actually have this like real kind of emotional, deep kind of connection to these movies, which is like, you don't really, I guess, people on the outside would not equate like having a deep kind of emotional connection to something like Friday 13th, where it actually feels like it carries some emotional depth or weight, which is kind of funny. But I really do, because the very first slasher movie and the very first horror movie I ever saw as a little kid was the original Friday 13th, and that after seeing that movie, it literally changed my life forever as far as my tastes, exposing me to films, exposing me to horror films, seeing a style of a film that I'd never seen before. The list is endless. It influenced the music that I got into. I mean, just everything. So Thursday night, late Thursday night, I had a confirmation from a good friend who was like, "Yeah, all right, I'm down." So I was like, "Great, sweet." So went to go meet him, and then he ended up driving, which was cool. We drove up to Bangor, to Orono. And, some people would be maybe not into the idea or turned off of like, well, I'm so not into the idea of driving an hour and a half or an hour and 15 minutes to go see a movie. And I get that. I totally understand that. But I think for me, it's like totally worth it. Absolutely 100%. Friday 13th, the final chapter, which came out in 1984, easily, it was directed by Joseph Zito. There's so many things about this movie that I love. It's also stars Ted White, who is my favorite actor slash, pun intended, stuntman whoever played Jason Voorhees. I'm a Ted White guy through and through. It was directed by Joseph Zito. We got Corey Feldman, Crispin Glover. It's to me is it's slasher perfection, and it's definitely my favorite movie in the franchise. And that's saying a lot because there's a lot of there's certain movies in the franchise that I really love that I think really really do stand out. A New Beginning, Jason Goes to Hell is one of my favorites. Jason Lives is amazing. Jason X I really love. So there's some movies that really stand out to me. I even really like the reboot. So I love Part 2 a lot. I just watched that not that long ago, and I was like, man, this movie is super awesome. So, that list can, that those movies, like as far as if there's a formal list or order on, which movies I love the most, that can kind of shift a little bit, and it has changed a lot over the years. But at the end of the day, I always go back to the final chapter. That to me is just always, that thing. I remember when I saw the final chapter as a kid. It just there was something about it. I can't quite describe what it was, but there was something about it where I was so enamored with that movie and obsessed. Like I remember watching the final chapter so many times as a kid, as a little kid. And then when VHS came along, or I should say when I grew up, VHS was very much the thing. Watching that on VHS so many fucking times. And it was the first time, seeing Corey Feldman and Crispin Glover and just, and it was scary. It was like going to like a haunted house thrill ride, going to a haunted house. It was scary. It had these like sexual things. I hadn't reached puberty yet, and it had these like things with sex in it that I was like kind of into, kind of sort of understood what they were doing, but then didn't really understand what was going on. It was just such a great time, and I remember it was just so impactful. And I have to say, watching it even now, as an old as an old fart, I enjoy it even more now than I did when I was a kid. I mean, obviously, I kind of get all of the sexual scenarios that are in it and some of the innuendos that happen that were over my head, or you know, the teenage kind of young social sexual situations that happened that obviously were over my head at the time, but now I can kind of understand it. So I think that obviously enhances the experience of enjoying it even more. And I do like there's a YouTube guy who I talk a lot about, Pizzawell, who's fantastic. One of my favorite YouTube guys, who is a massive Friday 13th fan, like next level. He's described for this movie, the final chapter, as being kind of the like an example of the quintessential slasher movie. Like if you like it's such a an example of like the perfect slasher movie. It like exemplifies everything that you want for a slasher movie. And I think it does. Like I think this movie is super funny. It's got all the tropes that you want in a slasher movie. It's got unbelievable fantastic kills, beautiful, really awesome atmosphere, great music. I generally think too there are moments in the final chapter that are generally scary and creepy. Some of the other Friday 13th movies are not necessarily scary per se, but they still have like very cool atmosphere. But I think there's moments in Friday 13th where it's very scary. I remember as a kid when I would watch this movie, the whole opening sequence where they're at the all the police and the paramedics arrive to where the massacre has happened, coming out of part 3, and Jason's Voorhees' body's there. And I remember that whole scene just being so scary to me. Like it just, I don't know what it was. And the whole thing just really creeped me out. And it still has that impact. And I think a lot of the intensity that Ted White brought to playing Jason Voorhees is just so awesome. Very intimidating. And I think this movie, in the whole franchise, I think this movie has some of the best atmosphere. And I think generally has some scary moments, if you will, to it, compared to some of the other movies, which are more just maybe a little more campy and just kind of goofy and silly, but fun and great horror atmosphere. But this movie, I think, has moments where it's like generally creepy and scary, like the basement scene in Friday 13th. Like that scene's really creepy and really scary, and so I think it's like legit. And when we got to the theater, Kyle and I, we got there. Some, again, like I started saying, some people would be like, "Oh, drive an hour and 15 minutes or whatever. That's too far." But for me, it's like if I'm into a movie, I'll do it. I mean, locally here for me, I tend to I enjoy driving, and driving long or longer distances never really bothers me. So in some ways, if I'm going on a long trip, or you just, someplace I got to drive for, quite a while, I almost, in a lot of ways, prefer driving because as a passenger in the car, I just get more exhausted. You can't really ever sleep in a car. You can't really get as comfortable, especially if it's a longer trip. So a lot of the times I find I kind of enjoy driving more because I have to stay more alert. I'm a little bit more comfortable as far as being awake. But locally we have a lot of great theaters. I think Maine is a beautiful place for many reasons here in Midcoast, but we got access to really great movie theaters, really amazing restaurants. We live close to the ocean. Locally we got the Colonial Theater right in Belfast, which is 6 minutes away, 7 minutes away from my house. We got the Strand in Rockland, which is a really beautiful theater, probably the best local theater. That's about 25 minutes away. Then we have Flagship 7, which is about 35 minutes away down at Thomaston. Maine Film Center in Waterville, which is an hour, a little less than an hour, which is a really awesome theater as well. Also, there's Flagship Cinema, which is a different one. It's got a little bit of a bigger setup in Waterville, I think, as well. Regal Cinema, which is that pretty nice theater as well. That's in Augusta. That's an hour. And then Black Bear Cinema, which is a little bit further, hour and 15 minutes from here, or give or take a few minutes. IMAX is the only IMAX theater that I'm aware of or that we have in Maine is in Saco, which is that's a haul. That's 2 hours. But or well, actually, that's over 2 hours. That's like 2 hours and 10 minutes because your Saco is like a little bit past Portland. But totally, absolutely worth it, I think. So we got to the theater, got there plenty of time, and it was funny because we got there, and Kyle, my friend Kyle, I went with. We were talking about going to see part three, and just it was such a fun time to see it in the theater because there were so many young people there, and people that were totally into the movie. Like people, the whole time we were there, people were like talking to the screen and yelling at the screen. People were screaming at the jump scares. People were laughing their ass off. Like it was just great, super funny, and it was just totally interactive. And I'm like, I forgot, like this is what going to the movies should be like. Growing up as a kid, going to the movies, that's how people were. Like they would react. A lot of the times now when people are in the theater, it still happens, but a lot of the times people sit there just kind of quiet and just kind of watch the movie, and a lot of times even at the end of the movie, I remember a time whenever the movie was over, it would be like going to a concert. There'd be people applauding and clapping at the end of the show, and that doesn't really happen at movies. So going to see part three, there was like all this applause at the end of it. It was just great. It was super fun. And Kyle and I were talking about, wow, I wonder what this is going to be like. We were both hoping and anticipating that it was going to be that same kind of experience where people were going to be just interacting with the movie and just having fun. And we got to the theater. We got there maybe 15 minutes or so before the movie. Got our tickets, and then we went, got our popcorn and stuff, and went to the bathroom and all that kind of stuff. There wasn't anybody really there. The theater was kind of empty, and I was like, "Huh, that's surprising." Because I kept thinking going into this movie, like again, I would say it's pretty safe to say, but Friday 13th, the final chapter, I mean, it's my favorite movie overall, but I would say in the franchise and in the horror world, like that's I would say it's probably the most popular movie in the franchise. Like I see that movie talked about more. People always, put all of the actors, the cast that were involved in that movie on a high pedestal, and rightfully so. Like I would say in the franchise, the final chapter is easily the most popular for perfect reasons. So I was like, huh, I'm surprised there's not really anybody here. There were a few people there getting tickets. So I was a little bit surprised by that, but I was hoping, I had a feeling people were going to show up, and I was hoping that this was going to be kind of that experience. And then so we got our tickets. We went into the theater, and there was a fairly good crowd inside the theater already. It was pretty spread out, but there was a lot of empty seats. And we found a seat. We sat like right in the middle. We basically sat in the same section where, from where we saw part three, kind of right in the dead center. And within like 3 to 5 minutes before the movie started and the first kind of the credits started or the trailer started, the theater just totally filled up, packed. And this theater was virtually sold out. I mean, it was packed. There were definitely more people at this screening. Part three, like there was a ton of people there, but there was not every seat was sold out. But with this movie, there was only two seats that I saw in the entire theater that were empty. It was definitely sold out, packed, and there was like all ages. Like there were kids, there were people my age, people even older than me, and then I even saw like a mom and her dad, like they had their kids there, like young kids. Like you had every age group there, and I was like, this is awesome. And I was, and then the movie started. The one thing I really love too about Black Bear Cinema, they're really cool guys, really cool people that run it. But I love what they do, where they'll show older films, but they'll show new trailers, which is great, really, really great. A lot of the times in my past experience, like I hadn't really seen that too often. For when they show an older film, uh, never I don't really remember that particular theater or that showing where they would show new films. They would show maybe you know older film trailers or what have you, but not usually new things. So it was really cool that they did that. And one of the trailers for a movie that I'm super excited about is this movie called Obsession, that was written and directed by this new guy who's been on YouTube for, well, actually for a while, but he's really great. Corey Barker. He wrote and directed this new horror film that is just got picked up by Neon. That looks absolutely fantastic. The trailer was like super awesome. I super excited to see this movie. It was the first trailer that I saw of the movie. So anyway, and then the movie started, final chapter, and again, it was super awesome. People were totally into the movie. People were like yelling at the screen. People were laughing their ass off. There were a couple of ladies sitting in front of me, and a couple of the sequences and during the jump scare sequences of the movie, they nearly jumped out of their seat, and it was just super awesome, totally interactive. And again, the transfer, seeing, I mean, the all of these movies, obviously, this came out in '84, of course, and so everything was shot on film. So it just looked absolutely spectacular. It really did. The transfer, it has a film because it was shot in film, and this movie is, well, quite a few years old now. And so there's a certain kind of grainy thing that you see on film that you don't get with digital. And I love that grain. I honestly do. I love that it just has this, this, it just has a little bit more of this organic feel. Like it's not perfection. It's got a little bit of this realistic kind of grainy thing to it that makes it feel more organic than digital a lot of the times. And you just can't beat it. So seeing it on the big screen with the sound system in there was absolutely fucking awesome. Again, and I've said this many times before, Friday the 13th is a movie I've seen so many times that I could not give you a number on how many times I've actually seen that movie. And watching it on the big screen for the very, very, very first time, it was literally, for me, like watching it for the first time. And it was amazing. Simply amazing. The other day, I was watching someone on YouTube. I can't remember who it was, but they were talking about physical media and how they buy a lot of movies. And one of the guys was talking about, and I'm not saying this in a way where I'm like bragging or saying that I'm cooler, but I just thought it was kind of funny. But this one guy was talking about, and it was somebody I came across being interviewed on YouTube. I can't remember if it was a director or an actor, but he was talking about his own movie habits on, buying physical media and Blu-rays. And he said that, like, yeah, a movie that he loves, he was referencing this one movie that I really, really loved, and he had just bought it on Blu-ray, and he was really excited. And he said when he watches a movie, or this movie in particular, he said, like, yeah, certain movies I've seen 10 to 15 times. When I really love a movie, I'll watch it like 10 or 15 times, and then buy it. And in this example, he was like saying, and then I bought it again on Blu-ray and watched it again. But me, it's like, no, I watch. There's been times where 15 is nothing for me usually. Like, it's like beyond that. Maybe because I need mental help. I don't know, but that's a small number for me when it comes to movies that I love and that I will revisit. Like, no, way more than that. Like, shit, way more. So it was kind of funny. But given all that being said, watching the final chapter on the big screen was absolutely fucking spectacular, and it was just so great seeing it in a packed house, all different ages. People were totally into it. It was just great. It was just so great, and it was such a fun experience. Like, I think that is something that is, again, I defend. I've gotten myself into situations of where I defend new films because I've come across that a lot, and I don't ever want the film going experience, like having the access or ability to go to a theater and experience a movie in the theater, which I really believe is the ultimate way to see a movie. I love my home movie watching experience. I have a pretty nice sound system. I love being cozy on my couch, and then having some food while I watch a movie, or I can pause the movie when I gotta go to the bathroom. But I have a pretty nice man cave here, and I'm pretty happy with it. Got a nice subwoofer, the whole thing, and I really enjoy that experience. And the quality of Blu-ray is spectacular. But I always say, and I've always thought, and I probably will always think this: the ultimate way to experience that movie, or just having that experience, is to see it in a really nice theater in a dark room with a bunch of strangers, or going with some friends. To me, that's how it's that's how you for me is how you should experience the greatest art form that there is, film, the art of film. And so I get concerned every now and then with how things are going, and with streaming, and then all of these corporations buying out other corporations and all these things, and seeing how theaters have closed and now they seem to have maybe come back a little bit. I get concerned that, I don't want to wake up one day and be like, the movie going experience has gone away and it's a thing of the past and it's something that you can never experience. Like, to me, that would be just awful, absolutely awful. So to me, it would be like, you know what? One day you can't, you'll never get to see live music again. Or it's like, you'll never have waking up one day and somebody will say, you'll never have the experience of being able to go out to a nice restaurant someday again. It's a thing of the past. To me, it's like that. So I, I'm a critic to a point, even though I feel like these videos, I mostly just kind of talk about the movies, maybe ramble on a little too much about them, but I just talk about the movies. And I like to think that I'm trying to be critical, and like using wearing the hat as a critic as well. But I try to keep it loose. But I try to feel like I find myself defending newer films that come out because as much as I mostly watch older films all the time, I still try to stay really current with new films that are always coming out. And and there's been times where you're like, man, they don't make movies anymore that are good, and it's just like, oh, fucking up and down, and that happens, of course. And there's so many movies that do come out, but I do think there are, some. There's been some fantastic movies that come out, so I find myself defending that a lot with people where they say, you know, oh, there's nothing good coming out in the theaters, and theaters suck, and they're too expensive, and you got to deal with people on their cell phones and all the shit. And I kind of defend that because I don't want that experience to ever go away. I think that's a really important thing for me. So I kind of defend that every now and then. Where I'm like, well, have you seen this movie? You're saying that all movies are garbage. That as far as new films, it's like there's some pretty kick-ass movies that have come out in the last couple of years or even this year. I mean, one battle after another just won Best Picture last night, which is amazing. And that movie is just an epic. I think that movie's a masterpiece. Saw it twice in the theater. But so I try to stay contemporary too, and so I don't want it to ever go away. And I think it's really, really important. And I don't think it will. I don't think it will ever go away because I do think people have a desire. But it was really interesting going to the theater. We got done, packed house, Friday 13th. Then we were hanging out in the lobby. Realized, man, this movie is super short. It's only an hour and a half. We were out of the theater by 8:30. And I was like, damn, it's only 8:30. It's Friday night. I was like, man, maybe I started thinking in my head, maybe we'll go see another movie, see what else is playing. And I had just heard about this new movie, Undertone, and I mentioned it to Kyle. And one of the guys that we're talking to out in the lobby, who was the manager, was saying he was going to go watch it. And he said this was the third movie that he was going to be seeing that day. And I was like, yeah, all right, awesome. He's another, like, the other thing that was really cool about talking to the guys, the manager and the general manager and the people that worked at this theater, was that they were really into movies. Like, they weren't just there to, like, because they just got a job there, like it was McDonald's or something. They were like, they really love movies. And so it was really cool to talk to them. And they saw everything that, they see everything that comes out. They see every movie that comes to the theater. So I said, hey, do you want to go see this movie, Undertone? Because it's so early. And he was like, Kyle was like, yeah, I think that might be a cool thing. And then he came around and he was like, okay, let's do it. And then so we went to go see this new film, Undertone, and I just uploaded the review for this movie, I think, this morning. So check that out. Brand new movie. It just came out on Friday, this past Friday. It's a new A24 film, a new horror film. pretty unique film. There were things about it I really liked, but then ultimately I felt like this movie, I felt like it was pretty overly hyped. And I was kind of disappointed with the movie. The more and more that time has gone by after seeing a movie on Friday, the more and more I have found myself disappointed with the movie. But anyway, we went to go see it, and it was a wild contrast because we went from Friday 13th, which was just fun and a thrilling, you know, thrilling ride, packed house, and then we went to see Undertone, and there was like 5 people, 6 people maybe in the theater, including us. And I was just like, what the fuck? And this was a brand new movie put out by A24, which now A24 is one of the biggest companies around. I mean, they're still primarily like an independent kind of art house film for elevated horror, which I hate that term, but that's what they're always called. As far as the movies they produce and release and distribute, but there was nobody in the theater. There was nobody in the theater. It was like crazy, crazy. And the thing that I came away from after watching both movies back to back, and the thing that I do again, I think, you know, there's good and bad in everything. And again, like I found myself really defending new films when people are shitting on the movie industry to a point of where they're like, a lot of YouTube people who have massive audiences and they're influencers, when they're outwardly telling their audience, you know, that Hollywood should go fuck off and don't go to theaters anymore and just go streaming 100% and this whole kind of thing. You know, these followers or these YouTube people are big influencers. Like I have a really small little I'm really grateful for what I have with this little channel that I have. It's a small little audience and I think there's enough enthusiasm and support that I've gotten from all the people that really support this channel that make it really worthwhile. I enjoy the hell out of it. But, we're small here at Film Fanatic headquarters, kind of small potatoes. And I think, and it's growing and slowly always growing and expanding. But these other people that are making these videos that have massive followings, like millions of people, they're influencers. Like they have an audience and people will like listen to them and take their advice when it comes to whether or not to go see a movie because that affects me too. I do the same things in some ways. And so I find myself defending that. Like, if you're saying just cancel the whole movie experience, I'm like, hey, slow down here. Like, it's not cut and dry like that. Like, that's kind of shitty. That's a pretty ignorant viewpoint. And that just doesn't affect people who go to the movies. That affects, filmmakers. But that being said, I have plenty of grievances with Hollywood. There's a lot of things I don't like about the big Hollywood system. And I think there's a balance. But one of the experiences I had, probably the biggest experience and series of thoughts that I had after seeing both of those movies back to back, seeing Friday the 13th, the final chapter, and then watching Undertone, was measuring kind of the level of just enjoyment that I had. And I know, obviously, they're very, very different movies. Although I think they're more related than you would think. And I think because I think they're related in it, or more closely related because of the budget size. Undertone is a very, very low budget film, kind of an independent horror film. And that's kind of what A24 does. They take a lot of directors and really kind of build their careers. Jordan Peele, Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, like they've done some amazing work, without a doubt. I also feel they've made a lot of clunkers, and I have lost a lot of enthusiasm for A24 by where they've kind of gone as of late. But I still would support their movies. I still like them, but I have lot more problems and issues with what they're doing now. But the thing that I came away from, and granted, Friday 13th and Undertone, very different movies. But I think in a lot of ways they're kind of similar because as far as if you look at it with the budgets that both movies had, and that they're both essentially low budget independent films, like really really low budget, like nothing in comparison to say big Hollywood, the big Hollywood system. In that regard, I think they're very similar. Outside of that, they're not. I mean, one is a campy slasher exploitation movie. This movie is, kind of, well, it does rip off certain movies, especially Blair Witch Project. But it's not an exploitation movie. I mean, it's more of just an indie film, kind of. It's going for like a little bit more of this art house kind of vibe. But budget wise, it's the same thing. But the experience that I got from it was like, man, Friday 13th was just fun. And I think a big part of going to the movies is you should probably have a fun experience, regardless of the weight of the story, or whatever the movie's about. I think too often, and I think this movie for me, for with Undertone, one of the things that bogged it down for me was just how everything was so fucking serious, and that everything in the movie, the filmmakers, the way the whole thing was structured, is that everything is meant to be taken in this kind of literal sense, and that it's going to be really serious, and everything's got to be taking, taken very seriously, and in a literal place. And there's no like levity to it. Whereas Friday 13th, it's totally all about that. And regardless of whatever movie you go to see in the theater, it should still be fun. Like actually fun and enjoyable. And I do think that too often, too many like movies outside of the exploitation world, especially, but or Hollywood films, and what A24 is kind of doing is they're forgetting about. There's no levity. Everything is like so fucking serious, and there's no like, where you can see the filmmakers having fun making the movie. Like I felt like with this movie, everybody was so serious and nobody was having fun actually making the movie. And I feel like that loses a connection for me. So anyway, but thanks again. Seeing Friday 13th on a big screen, that movie fucking rules. Final chapter. Thanks again to the Black Bear Cinema, and have a great day. Peace.